In a close-up shot highlighting his powerful muscles and numerous scars, the protagonist pondered his life. He bitterly admitted that he had never possessed anything of value. In the stifling atmosphere, Julian panted, utterly exhausted and terrified. At the same time, the bearded man lay on the ground with a head wound, angrily cursing Julian's name, while the young laborer toiled silently, highlighting the tragedy of an enslaved person's existence. Night enveloped the furious ocean, where massive waves roared as if to swallow everything. Amidst the churning sea, the old sailboat struggled against the storm, a testament to the claim that here, possessing anything was forbidden. On deck, the bearded pirate proudly boasted to his comrades about their largest cargo yet: 100 enslaved people. Below, the wretched, shackled individuals huddled together in despair, the cold clanking of chains echoing. With an anxious expression, the young crewman hesitantly questioned the captain about the decision to pass through the perilous all-old region. In response to his worry, the captain calmly confirmed that many ships had perished in these waters. The young crewman tremblingly mentioned curses and bloodthirsty sea monsters, but the captain immediately dismissed it and scolded him for being superstitious. He revealed that the very danger that kept the Navy and pirates away from this place was the perfect cover for their movements. The aggressive guard pointed his spear at the crowd, shouting at the enslaved people to be silent. While the heavily bearded man resignedly agreed, the pregnant woman frantically pleaded with him to stop, earnestly protecting an innocent child. The captain, with a contemptuous gaze, declared that he despised those who couldn't think and that food supplies were only enough for the crew and the designated number of enslaved people. He coldly affirmed that he would not share anything with stowaways, leaving his listeners stunned with fear. Seeing their plight, the girl, though sweating with anxiety, placed her hand on her chest, resolutely offering to share her meager ration. Moved by the pregnant woman's situation, the crowd of enslaved people began to speak up. From the men to the young youths, everyone vied to give up their own portions to help her and her child. Witnessing the scene, the man with spiky hair coughed profusely and sarcastically called them kind fools. In contrast, the captain closed his eyes in exasperation, snapped at him to be silent, and deemed it all a pointless waste of time. Bound tightly and covered in injuries, the long-haired prisoner panicked as his captors sarcastically welcomed enslaved person number 101 aboard. The pregnant woman wondered why Julian had sneaked onto the ship. He casually replied that he wanted to go to the mainland to make a living, use the money to buy back his freedom, and control his own life. Still reeling from shock, the enslaved woman pressed him, asking why he would help her without expecting anything in return. With a gentle smile, Mira explained that precisely because they were treated so poorly, enslaved people like them cherished compassion and mutual support even more. Clasping a precious item in his hand, the cloaked man bent down with a gentle smile. He softly shared that such actions helped them maintain their human dignity. Mira sadly offered a rusty sword, a memento of her late husband that she couldn't afford to maintain. The man listened silently, his pensive gaze fixed on the deteriorated weapon. From behind the bars, the girl smiled and offered to polish the sword in return for the meal. To the surprise of the young man and the bearded man, she confidently asserted that she could restore simple blades. Recalling a painful past, the older brother recounted that he was sold by his mother when he was young and adopted by a blacksmith. It was there that he learned metalworking skills. Working diligently with grimy hands, he remembered the hellish days where he had to perform all kinds of arduous tasks and endure burns from heated metal whenever he made a mistake. The older brother recounted in shock the life-or-death moment when he used a grinding stone to strike the head of the one who sought to end his life. The chilling story left the black-haired young man and the surrounding crowd of prisoners listening in stunned horror. Hidden behind his long hair, the young man was lost in bitter contemplation. He realized with a pang that he had never received compassion from anyone, not even his own birth mother. With intense focus, the craftsman's hands meticulously sharpened a spiral-pattern tool against the stone. As he worked, he humbly admitted that he was completely clueless about anything outside of this craft. Finishing his work, Julian returned the cleaned weapon to the girl, instructing her to conceal it carefully. He also warned her to keep it away from salty sea air to prevent rust. When asked his name by a stranger, the dark-haired young man simply smiled with relief, clutching the small dagger, and replied with sincere gratitude. Mira cheerfully introduced herself with a radiant smile. In contrast to her openness, Julian responded with a grimy face and wide eyes filled with surprise mixed with a hint of apprehension. Under the full moon on the night sea, the ship's cabin was immersed in weary sleep. The gentle lullaby of the pregnant woman echoed, waking Julian and making him look over curiously. Julian anxiously inquired about the baby's arrival. Mira smiled reassuringly, invited him to touch the mother's belly, and predicted that the baby would be born when they reached the mainland. Placing his hand on the pregnant belly for the first time, Julian was stunned as he felt the powerful kick of the tiny life. Seeing his astonished expression, the girl chuckled and explained that it was a sign of vibrant life. To Julian's astonishment, the girl closed her eyes, entrusting her sole hope. She wished for the child to be born safely and to have a happy life. In the cramped room, the pregnant woman placed her hand on her belly, resolutely telling the young girl that she was willing to endure any suffering, as long as her wish for her child came true. Amidst the gloomy darkness, Julian bowed his head, his entire body trembling. He desperately wondered why someone could act so cruelly, crossing such boundaries. Comforted by Mira, Julian clutched his chest in pain, not from illness, but from the harsh truth. He tearfully confessed that he had once thought being sold by his mother was normal, until now. With tears welling up, Julian looked towards his mother, his voice breaking with anguish. He admitted that knowing of the existence of such heartless mothers was an unbearable burden. After a trusting handshake with the injured man, the girl turned and embraced Julian tightly. The sudden and firm embrace made Julian's eyes widen in surprise, yet also filled with emotion. With eyes closed in understanding, Mira gently comforted him. She acknowledged the harshness of the world they grew up in, but earnestly urged her listener never to despair. Lying on the sickbed, Julian's eyes were wide, serious, and tense. He looked directly at the person opposite him, emphasizing that there was something important he needed to know from this moment on. Holding Julian close, the short-haired woman looked at him with gentle, steadfast eyes. She affirmed that even in this cruel world, love and kindness always exist. Lying prostrate on the cold wooden floor, Julian, clad in a cloak, looked up with an imploring expression. He pleaded with those around him never to abandon their faith in their fellow beings. In a moment of stillness, Julian raised his hand near his face, his eyes wide with astonishment. He seemed to have just felt a strange warmth and a subtle movement right beside him. The brutal overseer yelled at the working slaves, dismissing the pleas of the white-bearded old man. Seeing this, Julian, with resolute eyes, bravely stepped forward, volunteering to take on both his own work and Mira's. A devastating punch sent Mira to the ground. Blood splattered as the black-haired young man let out a piercing scream. Despite the pain, she still struggled to her feet, asking to work, but only received scorn from the turbaned man. Threatened with harm by the turbaned man if she worked carelessly, Mira clutched her aching stomach and leaned against the wall. Just then, Julian appeared with a mischievous smile, suggesting Mira should rest to have a safe delivery, leaving Mira stunned. Mira smiled brightly, expressing her thanks, her eyes filled with gratitude. In the distance, the silver-bearded old man and the short-haired young man stood silently observing the scene amidst the stacked crates. Though the white-bearded old man refused to eat, the spiky-haired young man firmly pressed food into his hand. He sternly explained that if the eldest perished, the burden of work would fall upon the rest. Julian had the good intention of offering water through the bars, but the short-haired man turned his back, refusing proudly. He coldly declared that he had not fallen so low as to accept charity from a mere child. Mira smiled as she relayed the message, saying that he had agreed to let Julian eat all the food. Julian held the food in her hand, looking back with unexpected surprise. In the cramped ship cabin filled with sleeping people, The pregnant woman sat leaning back, humming a gentle tune. Seeing this, Julian, beside her, worriedly asked if she couldn't sleep. Mira cradled her pregnant belly, smiling as she shared that she felt nauseous when lying down, so she had to sit up to sleep and conserve her strength. Hearing this, Julian looked at her with admiration, exclaiming that Mira was truly wonderful. Receiving such sincere praise for the first time, the young woman couldn't hide her surprise mixed with embarrassment. She bowed her head, sadly confessing that she felt unworthy of such kind words. Julian sadly denied being a good mother, which surprised Mira. To comfort her, she thoughtfully revealed that she too once had a son around Mira's age, leaving her listener stunned. Amidst painful memories, Mira recounted the tragedy of her life. Her husband, the father tenderly cradling their infant child, had been brutally eliminated by slave traders while trying to protect his wife and child. Clasping her tear-streaked face, Mira burst into overwhelming grief. She blamed herself for being a powerless mother, unable to save her own flesh and blood son. Closing her eyes amidst the light-filled space, the young man smiled brightly yet sorrowfully. Mira whispered that even now, the image of his smile remained vivid in her mind. Bowing her head, filled with remorse, Mira painfully admitted that she was a failed mother. That confession made Julian, beside her, widen her eyes, too stunned to speak. With a determined gaze, though filled with anxiety, Mira shared tearfully. Because her son had sacrificed his life for this baby, her sole wish was for the child to be born safely. Despite trying to be strong, the mother could not dispel the unease in her heart. Looking at her bare feet on the wooden floor, she worried whether her child could find happiness when born into such a cruel world. Standing up to look at Mira, who was huddled sadly, Julian pondered. She realized that for innocent children, their parents are their entire world. In the dim light, Julian gently touched Mira's face. She gently said that she could clearly feel the immense love Mira held for the child in her womb. Placing a hand over her mouth with a sorrowful yet trusting expression, Julian affirmed confidently. She believed that the child, the embodiment of such profound love, would surely find happiness. Holding the bewildered Mira tightly in her arms, Julian closed her eyes in prayer. She whispered, hoping that both the baby and Mira would find happiness. After a sincere thank you, Mira listened to Julian's views on maternal love. Placing a hand on her stomach, she thoughtfully confessed that she herself had just realized something important. While Julian spoke of the connection between people, he quietly bowed his head. He felt the bond between Mira and her child, for he carried the pain of being given up by his own mother. Sitting alone on the cold wooden floor, Julian stared into the void with empty eyes. He painfully realized that he had never experienced the sacred maternal love that everyone should have. Turning his back on the world, Julian was consumed by overwhelming fear. His dark-rimmed eyes widened hauntingly as he thought that perhaps, in this lifetime, he would never be able to forge such a connection. The atmosphere on the ship grew tense as night fell and Jack disappeared. Despite Julian's worries and the crew's murmurs, the bearded commander cruelly forced everyone to work before they could eat. Amidst the crowded deck, Mira called out. The long-haired boy named Julian heard her, turning his head in confusion to look towards the person calling him. On the windy deck, Mira excitedly pointed to the spectacular sky, inviting her friend to look. Standing beside her, Julian quietly gazed up, his hair blowing in the wind, lost in its vast beauty. Under the brilliant star-filled night sky of the Milky Way, the two friends stood stunned on the ship's deck. The magnificent beauty of the universe made them forget reality, leaving only pure admiration in their eyes. Exclaiming in astonishment, Julian could not tear his eyes away from the starry sky. Sitting beside him, the girl turned to look at her friend, a gentle and warm smile gracing her lips. In a rare peaceful moment, Julian turned to call Mira, his voice thoughtful. Mira smiled brightly, continuing her friend's words about the dream of liberation and freedom to do whatever they wanted. She offered a radiant smile, her cheeks flushed with happiness, then gently made an affectionate suggestion. Why don't they start living together? Looking up at the wide sky, Mira sincerely expressed that as long as she was by his side, he would feel incredibly happy. Hearing this, Julian beside her only bowed his head, lost in his own moody thoughts. Lying under the sparkling night sky, Julian looked up with a gentle smile gracing his lips, enjoying a rare moment of peace in the quiet space. While the girl laughed happily and agreed immediately, Julian turned away, thoughtfully saying that he needed more time to consider the matter thoroughly. As the large sailboat glided across the water, the silver-bearded old man smugly offered his thanks, while the spiky-haired man beside him was lost in thought. However, below in the cramped hold was a contrasting scene, where many people lay huddled, carefully covered under old cloths. As the girl calmly held Julian, who was distressed in his sleep, disaster struck outside when the panicked crew shouted that the ship had been swept into the all-owed region and was losing control amidst the fierce currents. Standing in the torrential rain, the captain frustratedly checked the map, unable to hide his disappointment upon realizing they had strayed far from the intended course, something he had tried his best to avoid. Sensing something terrifying was trying to drag the ship down, the panicked captain ordered them to immediately lighten the load to escape. Hearing this, the young crewman could only look at him with eyes full of confusion and fear, not understanding what was truly happening. A mysterious, cold man declared he would execute the plan right here, making the atmosphere on deck tense. While the commanders shouted for the crew to take positions, the soldiers and crewmen began to argue fiercely about why they had been summoned if the other force was confident they could manage the ship themselves. Suddenly, the cold man with the scarf thrust a knife into the older man's abdomen, causing him to fall backward in shock. Those witnessing around them stood rooted to the spot, sweat pouring down as they saw the gruesome sight unfold right before their eyes. Amidst the torrential rain, as the mysterious man displayed a savage, determined smile, a colossal monster emerged with a terrifying eye and horrific wounds. This sight left the crowd, including Julian and the surrounding men, frozen in absolute terror. As the bald man fell into a pool of blood amidst the piercing screams of those around him, the captain calmly looked up at the rain. He coldly declared the reason for his ruthless actions was his profound contempt for those who lived their lives in ignorance. The cruel trafficker mercilessly trampled the injured old man on the ground, his contemptuous gaze sweeping over the group of women and children trembling in the rain. He bitterly insulted them, calling them a useless lot bought for a pittance, incapable of doing anything worthwhile. The captors disregarded the prisoners as defective goods, while the slave master casually stepped on the defeated man. He cruelly revealed that since they were his property, faking accidents for insurance money was the quickest way to profit. The mastermind confidently asserted that this sea area was completely isolated, with no military vessels or witnesses venturing near. Hearing this, the bald man fell into utter panic, his eyes wide with terror as he desperately shouted for everyone to quickly escape this place. Chaos engulfed the scene as the crowd of men screamed and trampled over each other in frantic panic. Amidst this tumultuous scene, the captain angrily roared, trying to urge the out-of-control crowd to use their heads to think. While the guards brutally assaulted the bound prisoners under the captain's cruel order to eliminate them all and cast their bodies into the sea, the blond man bravely shielded them with his body. He shouted for Julian to hide immediately behind him to avoid the vicious blows. With his face contorted with strain and sweat pouring down, the short-haired man put all his strength into plunging the knife into the shoulder of the man in the hood, creating a moment of painful violence. The scene descended into chaos with Julian's piercing scream as he witnessed the man next to him severely wounded by a blade. Despite blood gushing from his arm, he still managed to shout urgently for everyone to quickly run to the lifeboats before collapsing. The sailors coldly cast the bloodied bodies of the prisoners into the churning sea. The haunting sound of splashing water echoed. Witnessing this brutal sight, the bearded commander merely casually offered sarcastic praise for this brutality. Amidst the battleground strewn with fallen bodies and blood-soaked mud, Mira held Julian tightly in her arms, her tears mingling with rainwater. He choked with realization that all those who had fallen had sacrificed their lives to protect the pregnant woman and the child to their last breath. The cruel individual mercilessly trampled the fallen victims, scorning them as useless scum only worth a few insurance coins. While the female prisoner suppressed her extreme rage, the captain coldly ordered his soldiers to eliminate the remaining individuals and dispose of their bodies in the sea to conceal the evidence. A man suddenly broke out in a cold sweat, sensing a chilling abnormality engulfing the space. With a terrified expression, he stammered, trying to call the captain to warn him of the looming danger. Adrift in the stormy night sea after the ship sank, the girl was horrified to realize her body was immobile. Clinging tightly to Julian, she was stunned to see strange raindrops suspended in midair as if time had frozen. Both Mira and the older man were frozen in shock as they witnessed the bizarre supernatural phenomenon. Raindrops frozen and suspended right in midair. Astonishment and bewilderment were evident on their sweat-drenched faces at this absurd sight. On the ship's deck, strewn with lifeless forms, the surviving man and woman clung to each other in absolute terror. Right behind them, gigantic tentacles slowly emerged from the ocean's darkness, signaling that a true nightmare had just begun. Mira's eyes were wide with horror, sweat pouring off her as she stared at the danger before them. In her arms, Julian was also curled up, both of them paralyzed by the overwhelming fear that enveloped them. A colossal tentacled monster loomed into view from the darkness, extending its hideous, menacing suckers. Facing this horrific creature, Julian and the two men were frozen in place, cold sweat breaking out as death was imminent before their eyes. The grotesque creature slithered and writhed its colossal body, producing horrifying, squelching sounds. Cracking and gurgling sounds echoed as countless slimy tentacles moved, making the space suffocating and repulsive. From amidst the mass of black tentacles, the mysterious entity extended a human-like hand and asked the desperately sobbing woman if she sought its blessing. Mira could only look up in utter horror and despair. While the couple gasped, exhausted and terrified, the cold, tentacled entity presented two harsh conditions. It demanded they choose: either offer up a great many spirits, or relinquish a pure love. The entity declared that the first condition, the offering of spirits, was complete. Now, pressure weighed heavily on the two as it asserted that the second condition could be fulfilled by either of them, forcing them to make an immediate life-or-death decision. The colossal entity delivered its cruel final verdict. One person would have to perish as an offering. In return, the survivor would receive its blessing along with unparalleled power. Trembling in panic, Julian cried out, demanding to know what the creature before them truly was. In response to this agitation, the monster merely declared coldly that its identity was utterly unimportant. Hovering above the two frightened individuals clinging to each other, the strange entity explained the law of exchange. It would bestow power to fill what it took away. It compelled them to choose immediately who would accept the loss of their pure love. While Julian stood frozen, his face drenched in sweat from fear, Mira collapsed in agony. She sobbed, her hands clutching her abdomen as if trying to protect something most precious. A close-up of wide, strained, sweat-filled eyes revealed the immense pressure on the individual. Beside them, the tentacled entity's gaping, black maw affirmed that its blessing would ensure their safety. Julian urgently implored Mira to bring forth the child at all costs. In a fit of extreme panic, Julian sprang up, ready to offer up his own life in exchange, as long as the child was safe. Mira ground her teeth until they bled, trying to suppress the tearing pain within her. Meanwhile, Julian turned and walked towards the light, leaving Mira kneeling in despair with a final message: live a truly happy life. Though drenched, Julian turned back and offered a gentle, serene smile. In stark contrast to his peace, Mira could only watch his retreating form with a dazed face and wide, horrified eyes. Julian smiled brightly, his eyes closed in contentment. He raised his fist to the sky, as if celebrating a silent victory or demonstrating unwavering resolve. Suddenly, a rough hand seized Julian. Amidst the tragic scene with victims lying strewn about, Julian turned in surprise as Mira pulled him away, trying to escape the blood-soaked scene. Gasping for breath, her face drenched in sweat, Mira looked straight ahead with panicked yet resolute eyes. Clasping the bundle of cloth tightly in her arms, she vowed never to let this tragedy happen again. Julian was wringing out his drenched clothes, the sound of dripping water echoing in the silent space. Suddenly, he froze, his eyes wide with shock as if he had just realized some terrible truth. Her hand holding the knife trembled, yet her eyes blazed with determination. The pregnant woman stood guard, protecting what remained. She declared firmly that she would not allow any more of her children to perish, no matter the cost. After receiving instructions from the adults about caring for the new sibling, Julian rushed forward in a panic. The boy watched in horror as his dark-haired sibling writhed on the floor, blood seeping from its mouth in extreme agony. With a gaunt face, smeared with blood and sweat, Mira exhaustedly looked down at the tiny life in her hands. The newborn cried its first cries amidst a tragic and tumultuous situation. The mother, with disheveled long hair, clutched her child close, tears streaming down endlessly. The baby's cries mingled with the mother's profound sorrow, creating a heart-wrenching scene. Drenched and exhausted, the mother announced the child was a girl. Mira, though her face still bore traces of sadness, resolutely named the baby Diana, while Julian silently held the tiny, wailing infant. Despite blood seeping from the corner of her mouth, Mira held Julian tightly as he trembled with fear. She choked out her final words of love for both children, like a poignant last farewell. Mira stumbles, leaving trails of dark liquid, while Julian tries to support her with a horrified expression. As the soldier shouts Mira's name when the monster slithers onto the deck, Mira stands frozen, dark liquid also beginning to pour from her mouth. A bound body is thrown into the deep sea, creating a loud splash that utterly horrifies Julian. Immediately after, the colossal tentacled entity emerges from the water, declaring its satisfaction with the offering and demanding the girl state her wish. Amidst the chaotic scene, Julian clutches the baby tightly, an enigmatic voice echoing in his ear, promising that power would arise from this very extreme despair. Around him, the panicked crew members scream as they realize their bodies are completely paralyzed, unable to move. The captain looks down with contempt, insulting those on the floor as mere scum fit only for sacrifice. However, the young man remains unfazed, glaring at him and sternly demanding concrete proof. Soaked and deeply moved, Julian cradles the newborn in his arms. He asserts that this tiny life is living proof that everyone's sacrifice, and especially Mira's life, was not in vain. The monster agrees to grant Julian's wish. Instantly, loud explosions shake the space, and his right eye transforms grotesquely with intricate patterns, reflecting utter horror. Blinded by greed, the captain orders his soldiers to eliminate the child and capture the octopus monster alive for profit. When the monster calmly allows them to move, the soldiers cheer and charge forward in a blind assault. Strange cracks begin to spread across Julian's horrified face. Simultaneously, a terrifying explosion erupts on the ship's deck, throwing sailors into the air and engulfing everything in thick smoke and flames. A mysterious arm flashes forth at breakneck speed, shattering its target in an instant. The hooded man barely manages to turn his head, his face frozen in shock as he witnesses the destructive power right beside him. The older man gasps in horror as he witnesses the chilling transformation before his eyes. Julian's body suddenly emits plumes of black smoke. His face cracks open with dark veins, and his eyes bulge in pain and madness. Amidst the slimy remains, a man screams for the captain while his body convulses and his bones crackle with pain. Beside him, Julian, with his fractured face, desperately asks what in the world is happening to them. Standing amidst dark tentacles, Julian coldly reveals the origin of his terrifying power. He declares that he has absorbed the entire life force, strength, stamina, speed, and reflexes of 100 enslaved individuals. Touching his fractured face, Julian is utterly stunned. A voice echoes in his mind, confirming that all those borrowed powers have been merged and fully bestowed upon him. Julian tries to reassure, advising someone to wait a little longer. Beside him, a baby whimpers and writhes in pain, while Julian witnesses it all with eyes full of anxiety and astonishment. Julian crouches low, surrounded on all sides by a group of aggressive soldiers. These individuals are drenched in sweat, weapons clutched in their hands, their eyes filled with murderous intent, ready to assault the lone figure. Shouting wildly, the sweat-drenched soldiers charge forward in a unified assault. Simultaneously, his eyes turn bloodshot, marked with terrifying blood vessels and cracks, as if a formidable power is poised to erupt within him. Amidst the battlefield strewn with fallen bodies, the man swings a metal rod, delivering a critical blow to the victim. Blood gushes as the brutal strike connects, creating a horrifying and gory spectacle. Hidden in the bushes, Julian gasps for breath, his face drenched in sweat and tears. His eyes are wide with horror, as if he has just witnessed something beyond his endurance. Stepping barefoot on the blood-soaked, shattered wooden floor, Julian watches in horror as a cloth bundle falls. He quickly kneels beside it, places his hand on the injured person, and silently thanks the heavens in choked emotion. In his final horrifying moment, a sharp blade pierces Julian's neck. His mouth gapes open in extreme agony, his eyes wide with shock as blood erupts from the fatal wound. Taking advantage of an opening, the captain swung his axe, striking the blonde victim's head and causing a spray of crimson amidst cries of pain. As the victim writhed in agony on the wooden floor, the attacker lay prone, laughing triumphantly at having delivered a decisive blow to the fool who dared to let his guard down. Julian screamed in horror as a strange object pierced his eye socket, but then was bewildered, wondering why he was still alive despite bleeding profusely. Witnessing this absurd sight, the man in the hat trembled in fear, just as a mysterious tentacle emerged, coldly declaring that she had nothing to fear. In the dark space, black and white tentacles writhed eerily, carrying the voice of a mysterious entity. It slowly confirmed an obvious truth. The opponent had also received 100 more lives, as a weighty pact had just been established. Unable to believe his wretched situation, the man desperately dragged himself across the wooden floor, frantically pleading with Julian, who stood stunned nearby. He tried to persuade him to help by promising a third of his immense fortune. His eyes filled with greedy and fearful entreaty. With a face distorted with rage and a large crack around his left eye, Julian roared in fury, berating his opponent to use his head. He swung his fist, delivering a devastating blow, ignoring the desperate pleas to stop echoing from somewhere. From the small boat adrift in the distance, the man watched in horror as the colossal tentacles of the sea monster crushed the large sailboat in a scene of devastating destruction. The sound of splintering wood and splashing water echoed, signaling the unstoppable might of the ocean's wrath. The giant sea creature thanked Julian for the precious offering, promising that the sea would no longer harm him. It gently nudged him with a tentacle, wished him luck, and affirmed that the boat would automatically reach shore without needing to be rowed, leaving the girl staring blankly as its form sank beneath the water. Julian gazed intently at the tiny being nestled in his arms, his eyes revealing a mix of surprise and worry. The sleeping newborn suddenly clutched the adult's finger, a small, instinctive gesture that held a strangely sacred connection. Julian sat huddled alone on the drifting boat, a bitter smile on his tear-streaked face. He choked back a self-deprecating remark about his meaningless life, painfully realizing he had never truly possessed anything precious. But that moment passed, giving way to a brilliant dawn shining on the small boat cutting through the waves out to sea. The rower shouted with renewed vigor, marking the beginning of a true life, carrying the heavy responsibility for 100 souls accompanying him. Startled awake amidst strange creaking sounds all around. Holding the light-haired baby in her arms, Mira pondered the survival instinct of children. She gently observed that having no other way, they could only use their cries to express their urgent needs to the outside world. With a gentle smile, Mira explained to Julian that those heart-wrenching cries were a plea not to be left alone. She believed that the fear of being born into a completely unfamiliar world made these tiny beings crave warmth, like the hand gently placed on her pregnant belly. Mira calmly offered sincere advice. At such times, one must hold the child close and smile to soothe all anxieties. She emphasized the importance of whispering a promise to always be there, creating a firm anchor for the tender soul. Turning to confide in Julian, Mira admitted something strange. Those very words of comfort also helped her regain her composure. She affirmed that by giving care, the feeling of no longer being alone would bring a truly complete happiness that exists in this world. The sound of a baby crying echoing across the calm water made Julian on the boat feel a pang of sorrow, and he quickly hugged the baby close to comfort it. Though he continuously reassured that everything would be all right, his eyes revealed clear panic, as if he himself needed comfort in their uncertain, adrift situation. Amidst the vast waters filled with floating debris, Julian looked around in bewilderment, not understanding why he was there. He held the baby tightly, huddled in the rickety wooden boat bobbing with each wave, a sense of unease enveloping them both. The new chapter opened with a desolate scene of wreckage drifting on the sea, where Julian sat alone on the tiny boat. Contrary to the promise of a smooth sailing journey, the surrounding signs indicated that trouble and danger were truly lurking. Standing amidst the scattered wreckage of destroyed structures, Julian could not hide his utter shock. His eyes widened in horror, his mouth agape, unable to utter a word before the horrifying devastation laid bare before him. A colossal fish monster suddenly emerged from the swirling water, carrying envy and resentful thoughts of injustice. Its sudden appearance and hideous form terrified Julian on the boat, his face pale and drenched in sweat. While surrounded by strange sea creatures, Julian, the child, suddenly heard a command from the void forbidding any harm to them. He was bewildered, not understanding what was happening, only able to utter words of frustration about the unfairness of this ironic situation. The colossal tentacled monster roared in fury, unable to accept that a lowly mortal had received a blessing from that being. Faced with the sea entity's wrath and the ghostly faces surrounding him, Julian could only clutch the cloth bundle in his hands, trembling with terror. Julian collapsed to his knees, utterly panicked as he faced the grotesque skull-headed creatures scattered everywhere. They didn't hesitate to threaten to devour her despite any punishment, deepening her despair as she couldn't comprehend the monster's purpose. As the sea monster slithered onto the boat's side with its sharp teeth, Julian had no choice but to clutch the precious item in his hands and leap overboard. The jump in that moment of life or death revealed sheer horror on his face, leaving the sinking boat behind. Standing forlorn amidst the desolate wreckage with the child in his arms, Julian suddenly heard a contemptuous voice echo from the void. The voice called him an insolent one, while countless invisible entities seemed to surround him, creating a suffocating and menacing atmosphere. A colossal eye surfaced, coldly threatening the downfall of the land humanity clung to. Simultaneously, deep beneath the sea, the dragon monster and its brood were furiously destroying the base of the structure, determined to drag everything down into the ocean depths. Inside the colossal mouth, Julian fought wildly, swinging his sharp weapon at the unseen foe. Despite the black liquid splattering, he yelled in fury, daring his opponent to choke on his decisive strike. Without hesitation, Julian stood on the head of the colossal worm monster, unleashing a thunderous blow with all her might. Her spear pierced deep into the target, causing the grotesque creature with swirling eyes to writhe under the overwhelming power. Julian knelt, decisively piercing 2 sharp points into the monster's body, making it shriek in agony as blood and black smoke surged out. However, even in its frenzy, the monster managed to unleash a brutal whip-like counterattack against the one who had just harmed it. In an instant, a razor-sharp tentacle lunged with terrifying speed, piercing through Julian's midsection as he held his sword. The devastating blow left him no time to react, only able to widen his eyes in utter shock as blood welled up from his mouth and wound. A gruesome scene unfolded as Julian's body was sliced and pierced from all directions by countless sharp tendrils. He thrashed in despair, his face contorted in extreme agony as continuous cuts tore at his skin. After deftly dodging the worm monster's bite, Julian was painfully flung away but immediately regained his balance. With unwavering resolve, he charged forward, swinging his weapon to deliver a decisive slash to the monster's head, causing blood to pour out. Julian lay slumped on the ground, his body pierced by countless sharp spears. In a spreading pool of blood, he painfully clutched his face, helplessly enduring the brutality of the recent battle. The young man's blood-stained and tear-streaked face appeared hauntingly, showing extreme torment. The numerous sharp objects embedded in his body were testament to the brutal assaults he was enduring. Suspended and held fast by the worm monster's tentacles, Julian acknowledged the enemy's terrifying agility. But instead of giving up, he unexpectedly gripped one of the binding ropes, his eyes flashing with defiant challenge before launching a counterattack. Using all his might, Julian strained and pulled hard on the rope, his muscles taut with power. This sudden action startled the sea monster, its single eye widening in confusion as it was dragged against its will. Clinging tightly to the thrashing worm monster's back, Julian frantically tightened the black rope, causing the monster's blood to erupt. Despite the monster's pained shrieks and commands to release it, he gritted his teeth in refusal, his eyes burning with determination to eliminate the foe. The tentacle ropes coiled tightly around Julian's body, crushing and ripping at his skin in a brutal attack. He roared in pain, his hands desperately trying to resist as blood splattered under the terrifying pressure of the spiral monster. The intense pain made Julian lose control. His vision blurred, and his body began to convulse and grotesquely alter. His pupils contracted in horror as he felt his flesh changing, gradually transforming into a hideous creature with a colossal eye. On the back of the colossal serpent monster, Julian was bound so tightly he couldn't move, only able to loosely grip the staff in his hand. The monster below opened its mouth full of sharp teeth, oozing grotesque, viscous fluid, creating a menacing and slimy spectacle. Struck by the potent blow, Julian clutched his mouth in agony, then tumbled from the colossal creature's back, sliding helplessly downwards. Just as he collapsed, a mysterious voice echoed with knowing insight, revealing that it had witnessed everything and knew the secret of his 100 lives. The colossal sea monster unleashed a vicious curse, vowing that its victim would perish and revive endlessly until his miserable existence ended at the ocean's bottom. As Julian glared in fury, the monster opened its maw and swallowed a falling form into the dark abyss. In stark contrast to the child's peaceful sleeping face, the narrator's voice rang out, cold and bitter. He viewed the tiny being as merely a burden, an unwanted, heavy responsibility thrust upon others. With a scrutinizing gaze from its giant eye, the fish monster delivered a cruel judgment on its opponent's future. It declared that person's life would be forever bound by that burden, then mockingly questioned if it was any different from the existence of a lowly servant. A close-up of Julian appeared, his pupils spiraling like a mysterious mechanism. He was submerged in a viscous liquid, emitting eerie gurgling sounds as if being absorbed or transforming in the darkness. From the colossal, bony mouth full of sharp teeth, a voice expressed feigned pity for the child. The entity maliciously questioned whether its opponent was heartless enough to let the child live a life devoid of a mother's affection. As Julian fell freely with fatal wounds, the mysterious eye entity continued to whisper sweet temptations of demise. It persuaded him that if he simply let go and passed away here, he would be reunited with all his lost loved ones. Julian's blood-soaked face appeared in a close-up, his wide, vacant eyes filled with utter terror. His disheveled hair and facial injuries were vivid proof of the horrific ordeal he had just endured. In the deep ocean, sea monsters encircled Julian, who floated motionless, whispering about the eternal laws of the sea. It promised an eternal reunion, where he, the child, and one other would all return together to oblivion in the cold seabed. Pierced through the back by a sharp object, Julian fell freely through the frigid, snowy sky, fresh blood staining the air crimson. His eyes were wide with shock, feeling life slowly departing his body in this painful, fated moment. Standing on the fragile boundary between life and demise, Julian wondered if passing away was the path to reunion. Faint images of his loved ones appeared one by one, making him choke back tears as he thought of seeing Mira again, the one he constantly longed for. Memories of that winter day flooded back vividly into the narrator's mind. when Julian of old watched that person's figure departing. He still vividly remembered the person's happy face holding a few meager silver coins, leaving behind the wooden house amidst the pristine white snow. The child, covered in dirt and grime, looked forward with tear-filled eyes, recalling the heartbreaking moment he realized the cruel truth. Though young, he understood the pain of being sold by his own kin, an indelible scar on his soul. That person's silhouette continued to walk on the snow-covered path, fading from his sight. He bitterly recalled that the person had left decisively, without a single glance back. Huddled in the corner of a filthy livestock pen, Julian was lost in painful memories of a harsh past. He clearly remembered the stinging pain from burns and the bone-chilling cold of winter nights spent sleeping in foul-smelling animal sheds. Long hair partially obscured his pensive face as Julian was lost in memories of a moonlit night at sea. The image of a large sailboat anchored amidst the swaying waves appeared clearly, hinting at a journey or a significant event from the past. The warmth of holding Mira in his arms starkly contrasted with the cruel reality, and Julian was in extreme agony. Tears mingled with blood on his face as the anguish of losing his most beloved person erupted, tearing at his heart. In a hazy, fluid space, a frail body curled up, floating, drifting with the current. Gurgling sounds of bursting bubbles echoed in his ears, submerging him into a state of limbo between life and demise, solitary and cold. With a body covered in injuries and tattered clothes, Julian stood silently in an endless white space, strange specks of light hovering around him. From a distance, Mira silently observed him, creating a mysterious encounter in the void. With eyes wide with excitement and a radiant, almost eerie smile, Mira opened her arms in a warm welcome. She eagerly called out, inviting Julian to join her, as if awaiting a promising reunion. The man's face seemed to melt, contorted in agony and despair. He bowed his head in thought, uttering words full of regret for the simple desires he had yearned for his entire life but never achieved. Amidst the chaotic, collapsing scene with frenzied tentacles destroying everything, the desperate girl reached out towards the falling, pieced-together man. She screamed in her mind that all she needed was someone who would never abandon her in this cruel world. A terrifying rumble echoed as a large wooden structure collapsed into the water, shattering into pieces. The violent tremor startled the sleeping child awake, their eyes wide with fright, searching for the source of the chaos. The wailing cries of the newborn echoed mournfully amidst the chaotic backdrop, where a whirlpool of water formed a dark abyss. Meanwhile, Julian was slowly sinking into the deep chasm, with only air bubbles rising like a final farewell. A close-up of Julian's face revealed extreme terror. His disheveled hair hung down, partly obscuring his distress. His eyes stared blankly ahead, as if he had just witnessed something so horrific he was speechless. Observing the crying baby, Julian mused on the helplessness of tiny beings. He silently told himself that without language, crying was their only means to communicate and demand attention from the world around them. With a wide, unsettling grin and hauntingly wide eyes, Mira made a chillingly profound observation. She asserted that the heart-wrenching cries of children are, in essence, the most desperate plea. "Please don't leave me alone." The expressions on Julian's face changed continuously and inexplicably, from a happy smile to a sorrowful bowed head, and finally, cold indifference. Beside her, the baby in the blanket was still wailing uncontrollably, seemingly sensing the instability from the mother. With a cracked eye and eerily swirling pupil, Julian snapped out of his confining illusion. He unleashed a thunderous punch, shattering the surrounding black smoke, asserting his powerful return, leaving onlookers astonished. After flinging Julian into the air with a brutal strike, the colossal serpent monster proudly declared victory. It mocked his escape attempts as futile, for the venom had deeply permeated, completely paralyzing his body, leaving no retreat. The warrior charged forward, delivering a devastating punch to the colossal serpent monster, causing it to painfully erupt with both fire and fluid from its mouth. The monster was utterly astonished, unable to believe its adversary still possessed such strong resistance, and roared out bewildered questions. A shocking explosion erupted as Julian delivered a thunderous blow, crushing its hand, forcing Julian to suppress his pain and yank his weapon free to escape. While the observer realized the monster had discharged venom along with a smokescreen, Julian still bravely plunged down, delivering a fatal strike to the colossal creature's back. The monster roared in extreme agony, before a tearing sound echoed, followed by flesh and blood splattering everywhere. Julian, covered in injuries, howled wildly and swung his scythe, tearing through space at a terrifying speed. Blood-soaked Julian desperately cried out Diana's name, while Julian suppressed his anguish, soaring away to escape the encirclement of the closely pursuing tentacled monsters. The frenzied sea monsters roared for vengeance and to tear apart their foe, while Julian calmly held his spear, facing the dark, deadly vortex above. Despite his face being cracked and covered in blood, Julian shouted powerfully, ordering the grotesque fish monsters to clear his path. The warrior endured a fierce shockwave, flung amidst a curtain of water and explosive energy. From the spreading pool of inky black liquid, bizarre creatures with bulging eyes and sharp spines began to emerge ominously. Amidst the dire circumstances, Julian clutched the baby tightly, reassuring himself that he was not alone in this struggle for survival. Julian's eyes lit up with a mix of surprise and hope as he realized his small boat had finally drifted to shore. The cry of a child echoed, signaling life as the boat touched the sand. Diana wearily looked out at the open sea, relieved to have finally escaped the turbulent, drifting journey. Staggering ashore with his body aching, Julian knew he had to find food and shelter immediately, as the heavy responsibility of protecting Diana still weighed on his shoulders. Having lost too much blood, the man's head spun. He stumbled and collapsed, clearly feeling his life force being drained by hunger and exhaustion. Scene change. A young girl gleefully showed off her prize, a fish she had just caught with her spear, while an old man, covered in mud, quietly observed. The baby's appearance delighted the girl, while Julian, covered in mud, looked at the scene with extreme bewilderment. The heavy clang of armor announced the arrival of a giant soldier, filling Julian with extreme dread at the man's colossal, mountain-like size. Despite being covered in injuries, Julian still clutched the baby tightly and roared for the other person to step back, while a mysterious energy began to hum around him. A curly-haired boy rushed over frantically, calling out the name of the warrior Angval, who stood imposing in his armor. The armored man questioned the children's solitary predicament, and the boy anxiously pointed towards the heavily injured girl as if pleading for help. The atmosphere grew somber as the night revealed that the other person had sacrificed their life to protect them, leaving Julian so stunned he couldn't utter a word. Realizing the child needed nourishment, the armored person ordered them to follow and offered to provide goat's milk to sustain the tiny life. Though he himself was scratched, Julian couldn't hide his concern, reminding them that the other's wounds also needed immediate attention. The armored warrior looked at the gasping man clutching the baby. His conscience wouldn't allow him to abandon them to slowly perish, so he gestured for them to follow him. At the wooden house by the lake, the knight ordered medical supplies and new clothes to be prepared, and the young girl Titi quickly responded, rushing off to carry out the task. While stitching up the intricate wounds on the young back, the healer couldn't help but wonder what terrible thing had happened to someone so young. The soldier was astonished by Julian's extraordinary recovery speed, while Julian himself was stunned to realize his body had transformed, not only healing his wounds but also allowing him to breathe underwater. Julian thoughtfully sensed the changes within him, realizing that the more he used that power, the more perfectly his body adapted. Amidst the peaceful lakeside house, the armored figure remarked that the new clothes seemed a bit too large for the wearer's frame. The armored figure announced that dinner was ready, and Julian happily invited everyone to the lavish dinner table. As the young man's stomach rumbled with hunger, the armored figure generously reassured him to eat freely without worrying about money, which greatly surprised him. While eating a bowl of hot soup, Julian looked up at the armored figure and Titi, timidly asking why these strangers were so kind to help him. The warrior in the rough armor replied simply but firmly that caring for and protecting children was a natural part of life, requiring no reason at all. In response to his skepticism about selfless kindness, the armored figure asserted that it was a way to preserve human dignity, making Julian smile in gratitude. After asking for a clean cloth to wipe the bowl, Julian gently cradled Diana in his arms and fed the baby her first drops of goat's milk. The child's heart-wrenching cries echoed through the silent mountain night, shattering the peace of the secluded wooden house. Exhausted from comforting the baby's incessant crying all night, Julian helplessly decided to take the child outside for some fresh air, hoping to find some peace. While Titi was still soundly asleep outside, the man gently carried the baby out of the wooden door. Julian stood silently by the wooden fence, gazing out at the vast, expansive lake, savoring the rare moment of tranquility. Julian patiently comforted the now quiet child, while the iron armor and sword lay haphazardly on the grass like remnants of the past. Under the starry sky, the girl immersed herself in the cool water. Her eyes briefly showed surprise as she sensed another presence. As Julian was worrying about Diana's cries, a muscular woman unexpectedly emerged from the water, kindly asking about her sleeplessness. Julian was astonished to realize that the warrior always hidden in the iron armor was a woman, but she calmly replied that it was her duty to serve the country. Julian was sadly comforting the baby when her perceptive companion noticed her hidden sorrow and gently asked if her conscience was burdened. In the quiet space, the brown-haired girl frankly confided in the young man that she could clearly sense his feelings whenever his gaze turned to that woman. Holding Diana, Julian was consumed by guilt, painfully thinking that the baby was too young to understand and resent that her mother had given her life to save Julian's. Bending down to look at the sleeping child, Julian choked with regret, blaming himself for not having stopped the mother at that fateful moment. The anguish tearing at his heart made Julian clench his teeth. He wished it had been him who perished instead of Mira. Mira held the baby tightly, bitterly thinking that her existence was a barrier, for if she were gone, they could have become a complete mother-child family. The girl thoughtfully asserted that there were no set standards for a family, just as she and Titi, though not blood relatives, were as close as kin. With a distant gaze, she reflected that family was not a preordained destiny, but a sacred bond cultivated by people themselves. Under the starry sky, the woman turned to ask Julian about his vision for the future, about the home and life he wished for little Diana. Julian's sharp, determined gaze gradually softened as he held the sleeping baby close, promising absolute protection despite his own injuries. Sitting quietly by the water's edge, Julian whispered a wish that the child would have all the good things he himself had lost or never had the chance to experience. Mira closed her eyes and smiled contentedly, envisioning a simple yet luxurious dream of wealth, freedom, full meals, and a warm home. With eyes filled with love, the woman with the scarred face wished to protect the child, so that she could grow up in a world free from suffering and worry. When Julian inquired about their enemies, the dark-haired friend gravely replied that she would have to fight with all her might on their behalf, a task that would be far from easy. The girl looked back, her melancholic gaze acknowledging the harshness of the unforgiving world they were facing. In such agony that she wept dark, bloody tears, the girl bitterly realized that in this cruel life, there was no room for hesitation or tormenting regret. The woman gently advised Julian to devote himself fully to raising the child well, for that was the only way for her to find peace and forgive herself. The woman's practical advice about earning a living left Julian dumbfounded. This concept seemed entirely foreign to him. The girl tried to convince herself and others that money could buy happiness, but her wavering gaze betrayed the deep skepticism within her heart. Gently patting the injured girl's head, the woman softly reassured her that finding work could wait, and for now, the most important thing was to rest and recover. A voice urged Julian not to try and shoulder everything alone, especially when his heart was still bleeding from the pain of loss. Placing a hand on her companion's shoulder, the woman promised to care for him diligently until his wounds were completely healed. Holding his little child, Julian emotionally expressed his gratitude, choking up as he shared that it had been a very long time since he had met such kind people. When the girl announced the mere number of 100 people, Julian expressed surprise and dissatisfaction. considering it an unimaginably huge burden. Half a year passed, and life had gradually settled into a routine as Titi happily stood on the porch, waving Julian in for a warm lunch. Julian was holding the newborn in his arms in the forest, cheerfully responding to someone's call that he would be right there. Though a smile was on his lips, her wide eyes and the baby's surprised expression seemed to hide a hint of confusion at the unexpected situation. Suddenly, the boy pointed towards the dense forest and exclaimed in surprise, making Julian turn to him worriedly, asking what his son had seen. In his arms, the newborn also seemed to sense the abnormality and let out a cry, echoing the tense atmosphere. Diana squinted ahead with a look of suspicion, as if she had just discovered something strange, but Julian, who was with her, quickly dismissed it, asserting that there was nothing there. He urged her to leave so they could eat together, trying to divert her attention from that vague concern. However, deep within the shadows of the eerie forest, a monstrous entity resembling a giant goat lurked. Its eyes and horns glowed eerily, and it wore a terrifying smile, signaling an impending danger ready to consume those who dared trespass its territory. The young enslaved boy painfully recalled a dark past when he wasn't even treated as a human, his eyes filled with unspeakable sorrow. In his ears echoed someone's reproach about buying an enslaved child, rubbing salt into a wound that had never healed. While the hunter laughed, deeming the situation terrible, the man in the turban justified it as kindness, creating a contradictory debate. Standing beside them, the cold man declared that he would readily discard the enslaved person once they were no longer useful, his words cruel and without hesitation. Julian sadly mused that death might be a liberating grace if life offered no escape, while the captain bitterly recounted the tragic fate of someone who had hit rock bottom. He emphasized the person's ultimate despair when sold by their own mother, thrust into a life devoid of hope. A harsh voice declared that it was better to perish than live such a life, but Julian chose to face reality. Holding her child tightly with a worried expression, she admitted to Engvall that she had relied too much on others and was now determined to find work to change her destiny. Julian steadfastly expressed her desire to earn money to repay her benefactor and save for Diana's future, her eyes gleaming with strong resolve. She suggested the group go to a nearby village to inquire about work, ready to embark on a new journey for the children. However, upon arrival, they were met with harsh dismissal from a villager, who bluntly criticized them as nothing but a troublesome burden. He coldly declared that the village had no need for useless individuals who couldn't fend for themselves, extinguishing the group's newly kindled hope. Despite Julian's plea that he was willing to do anything, the village chief remained skeptical and contemptuous of their abilities. He challenged Thorfinn to prove that he wouldn't hold the village back if he wanted to be accepted, making the boy confusedly ask how to do so. The miner pointed towards the collapsed cave entrance, giving the group an impossible task: to clear the scattered rocks. He stipulated that they would only be accepted if they completed it in one day, and warned that the rocks would get larger the deeper they went, a harsh test of their strength. The armored man spoke up indignantly, arguing that this demand was too cruel for a child when even adults would struggle. Yet, the miner coldly replied that no one was forcing the boy to do it, leaving Julian standing there, watching in helplessness and sorrow. Despite the dissuasion and the difficulties ahead, Julian, with a dirt-smudged face, resolutely accepted the challenge, her eyes gleaming with extraordinary resilience. The peaceful village seen in the distance seemed to contrast sharply with the harsh battle for survival she was about to embark on. While the experienced man easily handled the first rocks, considering them trivial, the young man struggled laboriously with the immense weight. However, seeing the initial progress, he reassured himself that if he persevered like this, he might be able to complete the unimaginable task. But harsh reality quickly struck as the rain poured down, and the man collapsed under the immense weight of a giant rock on his back. His groans of pain mingled with the torrential rain, his body contorting under the physical torment to its absolute limit. Suppressing the pain, Julian gritted her teeth and used all her strength to push the enormous rock inch by inch across the sandy ground, sweat mixing with rainwater. From the high cliff, everyone coldly observed the desperate struggle as if watching an entertaining play. As Julian grew weary, the black-bearded man approached, announcing that they had cleared more than half of the work. This news brought expressions of surprise mixed with faint hope to the entire group, from Julian to the giant warrior carrying the child. However, human strength has its limits. The worker staggered with a heavy sack of rocks on his shoulder, then suddenly collapsed to the ground. The sack burst open, rocks scattering everywhere, turning all their efforts into a chaotic mess in an instant. Julian lay face down on the cold ground, despairingly realizing her limbs were completely numb and unable to move. Tears streamed from her eyes in helplessness, her choked sobs echoing in the silent, stony space. Witnessing the heartbreaking scene, Julian angrily punched the ground and uttered bitter curses. Meanwhile, the giant clutched the person tightly in his arms, leaving the surrounding crowd to watch in anxiety and confusion. In contrast to the tense atmosphere, the innocent child still smiled and babbled happily, completely unaware of the suffering around them. This innocent image further highlighted Julian's pained, sweat-drenched face as he strained under life's burden. Refusing to yield, Julian continued to struggle up, picking up stones one by one and putting them into his sack, his hands clenched so tightly they bled. Gritting his teeth, he used his remaining strength to drag the heavy sack, his body almost crawling on the ground. Every inch of movement was a desperate struggle of will. Heavy gasps mingled with the sound of his body scraping against the dry ground as the man persistently crawled forward. Though so exhausted he could only hear his own heart pounding, he did not abandon the burden on his back, continuing to drag himself along in extreme agony. Amidst the anxiously watching crowd, a startled call of Julian's name rang out. The only reply was a weak, ragged breath from a deteriorating body, his gaunt, sinewy arm a testament to his fading life force. In his weakest moment, Julian questioned himself in despair, not understanding what he was doing in this quagmire. Doubt gnawed at his mind as sweat and tears blurred his vision of his initial purpose. Just as Julian lamented having to work to the point of crawling on his knees, a hand suddenly grabbed his shoulder from behind. The strong tug startled him, interrupting his weary thoughts and signaling an impending new event. Faced with Julian's dire situation, the girl representing the villagers stepped forward, resolutely suggesting he use their strength. She earnestly wished to lend him a hand, while the teenager beside Julian couldn't hide his emotion and concern. The man tried to convince Julian that everything would be easy, but a chilling cracking sound emanated from the mechanical eye, which was fracturing, signaling the opposite. The reassurance seemed meaningless in the face of the physical pain clearly visible on the victim's face. The entire crowd of villagers stood silently on the shallow water's edge, their eyes fixed on the two solitary figures facing the endless dark void. Silence enveloped the space, creating an atmosphere of tense and mysterious anticipation for what was about to unfold. Looking at his rough hands, Julian reflected on his turbulent life, realizing that each time he faced an impasse, someone always came to his aid. That unspoken confession held both gratitude and a sense of inadequacy about his own vulnerability. Julian cried out in anguish, tormenting himself for never having accomplished anything by his own strength. Recalling the painful memories on the ship from years ago, he admitted he was just a child who survived thanks to the sacrifices and efforts of others, a remorse that nearly brought him to his knees. With his face fractured and drenched in tears, Julian choked up, wondering how he could bring peace to others when he himself was so wretched. He cried out, pleading with his opponent not to hold back, determined to push past his own limits, even if it meant enduring extreme agony. Memories flooded back, showing Mira, when he was entrusted with the responsibility of caring for his newborn sibling. His forced smile and the beads of sweat on his youthful face revealed the burden of responsibility that had fallen upon him at such a young age. Returning to the present, Julian knelt amidst the harsh land, reminding himself of the important promise he had to fulfill. He decided he would bear it all himself, not wanting to involve anyone else on the arduous path ahead. 3 generations stood side by side. The silver-bearded old man, the young man, and the girl all gazing solemnly forward. Their silence amidst the desolate landscape conveyed a quiet unity and determination in the face of the challenges awaiting them. Julian cried out in despair, his face drenched in tears, asserting that if he didn't do this himself, everything would be meaningless. It wasn't just a task, but a battle to affirm his own worth and will to exist. On the rough, stony path, Julian ran tirelessly with the heavy sack on his shoulder, ignoring all fatigue. The others could only watch his resilient figure, their silence serving as a testament to their admiration for his extraordinary effort. The villagers began to whisper, showing pity and wanting someone to stop the boy, believing he was too exhausted. But the armored giant carrying the child immediately roared, stopping their pretense by reminding them that they were the ones who started it all, and now they should be silent and witness the outcome. Under the brilliant sunlight illuminating the peaceful village, a line of villagers stood neatly, looking forward with solemn expressions. A quiet yet solemn atmosphere enveloped them, as if they were awaiting a verdict or a miracle about to appear. In another secluded corner, Julian stood silently in the empty lot, his bandaged arm a testament to past battles. Another person observed from behind, their gaze fixed on that solitary back, feeling the heavy burden of exhaustion weighing on his shoulders. Julian tremblingly uttered that was all, cold sweat pouring down her terrified face. Her wide, vacant eyes reflected extreme fear, as if she had just completed something beyond her mental endurance. Witnessing Julian receive the well-deserved reward money, the bearded man couldn't hide his surprise. He bowed his head, admitting his mistake, affirming that the other person was not only qualified but also more exceptional than anyone else for this task. Calloused hands handed the compensation bag to Julian, officially recognizing him as a new colleague. A respectful welcome echoed, marking the end of harsh trials and ushering in a new beginning accepted by the community. Though tears still streamed down her cheeks, Julian forced a smile, following invisible instructions, a distorted, sorrowful smile. The contrast between her shattered inner emotions and her effort to appear strong externally made her face more haunting than ever. Julian carefully placed the small cloth bundle into the freshly dug hole, her trembling hands filling it with handfuls of earth, burying the past. Then, with all her might, she hoisted the heavy wooden cross onto her shoulder, as if accepting to carry this sorrow for the rest of her life. Beside the freshly mounded earth, where a simple cross stood, Julian knelt silently in the desolate space, her solitary figure before the symbol of passing and redemption, sending silent prayers into the void. The long-haired figure clasped their hands reverently, their eyes closed, sinking deep into the soul's tranquility. In that sacred moment, all the world's clamor seemed to vanish, leaving only the communion between humanity and faith. Julian softly called Mira's name, her voice tinged with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Her gaze was directed towards the person opposite her, hoping for a response from the one she sought. Amidst the majestic snow-capped mountains embracing the peaceful small house, a prayer echoed in the wind, wishing for the departed soul to rest peacefully and continue to watch over and protect those who remained. Suddenly, Julian shrieked, calling out Angval and Titi's names sharply, her face full of astonishment. She pointed forward, as if she had just witnessed a miracle or a shocking event she couldn't believe her eyes. The group of women burst into joy upon seeing baby Diana begin to crawl. They showered her with praise, saying she was even better than Julian. Laughter rang out as Titi was teased for being mean, due to the humorous comparison, creating a moment filled with happiness. Angval couldn't help but laugh at the ironic situation, causing Julian to voice a resentful complaint. The brown-haired woman quickly apologized for laughing at such cruelty, while the man beside them grumbled disapprovingly about kicking someone who was already down. The women and children gathered together on the cozy rug, enjoying rare moments of peace together. They collected each small moment of happiness to warm their souls amidst a tumultuous life. The girl tenderly held Diana in her arms and gratefully introduced Marie, the devoted nanny washing clothes in the distance. Thanks to Marie caring for her daughter, he could work with peace of mind alongside the men toiling in the forest. The narrator introduced Joseph, Marie's husband, as a kind man who always treated his female colleagues equally. Though his face was beaded with sweat from work, his respect and kindness always earned everyone's admiration. Julian gripped the large axe tightly in his hands, taking on the task of chopping firewood for the entire village. Though a hint of worry appeared on his dirt-streaked face, he was still ready to tackle this arduous work to contribute to the community. Working in the ancient forest brought an unusually pleasant feeling, where the fresh air washed away all weariness. The beautiful natural scenery, with vibrant flora and fauna, made one feel at one with the rhythm of nature. Julian smiled contentedly among the trees, enjoying the joy of voluntary labor. He realized that when working according to his own free will, time flew by like a gentle breeze, and his soul became more relaxed than ever. The bearded man eagerly shared with Julian that his child was also around the same age as the little girl, and was certain they would become close friends in the future. Looking at the children sleeping soundly in their mother's arms, he couldn't hide his happiness imagining the day they would grow up. Julian's scarred eyes widened. He softly replied, "Me too," a profound expression of empathy for the other person's feelings. The brief statement held a silent understanding between kindred spirits. The pleasant lunch was interrupted when the woman, holding her child, anxiously asked Julian about unusual signs in the nearby forest. While Julian wondered about her excessive concern, the captain quickly reassured them that everything was as peaceful as ever, dispelling the tense atmosphere. However, the thoughtful man admitted that this peace was merely superficial, as most of the continent was an enigmatic jungle, largely unexplored. He recalled his father's warnings about terrifying things, hidden deep in the shadows where humans had never ventured. The narration led listeners deep into the forest, considered the sacred domain of gods and supernatural entities. It was a vast world beyond human comprehension, where the line between reality and myth became fragile. The bearded man reiterated the chilling curse that whoever entered would never return, and the only one who knew the truth was his reclusive father, hiding in the forest. The man sadly confirmed that he had tried to approach the old man many times, but was always harshly rejected. Angval offered to try and arrange a meeting with her father for the girl, sparking new hope for the investigation. Julian smiled gratefully, knowing this was a precious opportunity to uncover the secrets. When asked why she risked investigating the forest, Angval sternly revealed that it was a direct order from the king. For her, completing this mission was not only a responsibility, but also a sacred honor she vowed to fulfill to the end. The people revered the Supreme Lord as a living deity with unparalleled power, ruling over all from his magnificent throne. Beside him always stood the shadow of a mysterious prophetess, a powerful aide hidden in the darkness, supporting him with prophecies. However, a shocking announcement was made by the dark-haired man. The prophetess had foreseen the king's demise. This news was like an earthquake, signaling unpredictable upheavals about to strike the kingdom. From the towering throne, an authoritative voice proclaimed a devastating prophecy of destruction. Darkness would engulf the world in a sea of fire, and the guiding star would fade. Before the decree of eternal night about to envelop the land, the one kneeling at the foot of the throne could only tremble, accepting their harsh fate. The mysterious woman with two-toned hair looked directly at the other person with resolute eyes, issuing a stern warning that failure meant annihilation. She emphasized the supreme command, to find and eliminate this peril at all costs. While the black-eyed entity delivered a prophecy about a mysterious appearance in the forest, Angval affirmed her absolute faith in the infallible prophet. However, in another corner, two young girls conversed with skepticism, wondering if the prophecy was true as everyone rushed to search in vain. Recalling the past, Angval thoughtfully remembered her childhood, when she and her family were saved by the king. She deeply cherished that kindness and silently vowed to forever carry this debt of gratitude to him. Angval proudly shared her reason for enlisting to serve the country, but she couldn't hide her worry at the thought of investigating alone. Seeing this, Julian quickly reassured her that they were not alone, as all scholars and soldiers were being mobilized to track down clues about the prophecy throughout the forest. After Julian's serious instruction to report any strange signs, The scene shifted to a cozy wooden house. There, a family member informed his father that Angval had arrived and wished to inquire about the mysterious forest. The storytelling old man squinted, recalling strange tales of the forest from ancient times, which left his old friends around him surprised and pensive. Unable to contain her curiosity, Angval spoke up, earnestly asking him to elaborate on those mysteries. The silver-bearded man wearily listed mystical creatures like fairies or malevolent spirits that often appeared in old stories. When Angval anxiously inquired about his health, he merely offered a strained reassurance that he was fine, though his face couldn't hide his exhaustion. The silver-bearded old man sternly explained that people often fabricate things they don't understand, but it's best not to meddle with the world of strange creatures. He firmly advised the young woman not to recklessly intrude into the forest to preserve its inherent peace. Amidst the daily routine, as the gray-bearded old man fumbled for a lost spoon, the bearded man instructed young Joseph about tomorrow's hunting trip. Outside, Julian held baby Diana, smiling as he watched the child delightedly enjoying the cool night breeze. In the dark of night, the innocent baby reached out towards the shadows, startling Julian, who quickly reassured her that there was nothing there. Though he urged the child inside to escape the cold, he couldn't suppress his unease, turning his head to look back at the path with a wary gaze. The forest was plunged into dense, eerie silence. A mysterious voice echoed, reassuring itself that there was nothing there, but then faltered with a question full of doubt and fear. Amidst the chaotic clamor of the murmuring villagers, the blonde-bearded man couldn't hide his irritation. He shouted, demanding silence and urging everyone to get straight to the point instead of engaging in pointless arguments. Panic spread as the dark-haired man asserted that Joseph had vanished while checking rabbit traps, as he always did. Despite the light-bearded man's attempts to find a rational explanation, like a bear attack, he desperately cried out that something mysterious in the forest had taken him. In the dark, undefined void, the man free-fell, his face pale with terror. Mysterious claws appeared behind him, and in that desperate moment, the item in his hand slipped from his grasp. Despite the hunter's disarray at losing a comrade, Angval maintained the composure of a leader, urging everyone to calm down. He immediately directed the formation of a search party, while another hunter suggested sweeping the forest's edge around the village. Amidst colossal and enigmatic structures, Angval gazed into the abyssal depths. He resolutely declared that he would personally descend to its very bottom to search for the missing person. The silver-bearded elder confidently asserted, thumping his chest, that no one knew this forest better than him to lead the way. However, Julian, standing beside him, remained unfazed, resolutely demanding to join this perilous journey. Upon receiving the grim news that his son was missing in the forest, old Joseph, instead of panicking, appeared remarkably calm. He firmly stated that if it was his son, there was nothing to fear, as he himself had imparted all survival skills to him since childhood. The atmosphere grew confused when the dark-haired young man reminded the elder that his bow was still on his back, but the elder absent-mindedly mistook the young man's bow for his own. Despite the confusion, the elder clung to a strong belief that he was surely still alive. Julian hesitantly offered to use his special abilities to help, but Angval immediately and decisively dismissed him. Unwilling to be left behind, he looked directly at the armored warrior and firmly declared that he would go with him too. In an urgent situation with no time for explanations, the man in the hat ordered Titi to immediately take Julian and Diana home safely. Though he had many questions, Julian had no choice but to accept this arrangement given the man's resolute demeanor. Watching the two small figures disappear into the distant hills, Julian couldn't hide his anxiety as he asked if they would be safe and sound. Standing beside him, the light-haired woman silently held the baby tightly, her gaze sorrowful as she looked towards the horizon. The curly-haired girl's innocent question about whether Angval would return home was like twisting a knife in Julian's heart. He suppressed painful tears, silently holding the infant tightly, as if seeking a little comfort amidst the silent forest. The happy images of other families tenderly embracing their children only highlighted the ultimate tragedy in the final scene. There, a woman with a blood-stained face wailed in despair, clutching her tiny child who appeared utterly lifeless. Amidst the desolate, cracked land, Julian turned his back on the world, uttering bitter confessions. He sighed heavily, admitting that he could no longer bear to witness any more children losing their parents. Julian unexpectedly entrusted Diana's care to Titi, leaving her stunned. Leaving the astonishment behind, he turned and walked away with a gentle, reassuring smile, promising that everything would be all right.